Migrating swallows dance above the sun-drenched waters of a reed-lace world. Reed beds work in a fascinating way, their beauty enhanced by the quality and rarity of the inhabitants. In Britain, breeding marsh harriers cling to a reed-bed existence. And the bittern occasionally emerges from its secret world. For all of the year, this chameleon-like place, unstable in so many ways, is wrapped in seasonal splendor. Early morning, a water rail looks for food in the marginal cresses of a shallow pool. Here sticklebacks live, a favorite delicacy. The rail will later retreat to the dense forest of reeds, unseen but identified by its screaming call. At their edge, the reed beds are most vulnerable. They could be considered their own worst enemy. Allowing trees to take over ground, they've struggled hard to win. Initially, they find a foothold in shallow water, where few other plants could survive. Then, by multiplying through an intricate root system, they spread quickly around the edges of deep lagoons, pools, and rivers. The stems that grow from the submerged roots die back each year. In time, a damp mass of decaying reeds and clogged roots rises above the water level and begins to dry out. New plants can now move in. Early settlers include alder, sallow, and buckthorn. If the area remains dry for long enough, birch and hawthorn follow. Years later, the whole reed bed may have been replaced by a stand of oak woodland. In spite of its botanical transience, the scrub-infested edge of a reed bed forms a vital habitat for breeding birds. The grasshopper warbler, newly arrived from Africa, sprays a ratchet call across its territory. A resident male Chetty's warbler announces his intention to acquire property. The reed warbler has arrived, and although it will feed in the scrub, it comes as a new neighbor for the bearded tit, one of the few birds actually locked into a reed bed existence throughout the year. The varied song of the sedge warbler announces its arrival for the northern summer. Warm days of late spring encouraged the splendor of flowering hawthorn trees to hem in the reed bed. No white response to the season of growth contrasts with the reed mace, still struggling to find a colorful escape from winter. Last year's reed heads have lost most of their minute seeds, blown by the wind to fresh pastures or consumed by bearded tits in their struggle to survive the winter months. Throughout winter, the root system remained active, producing shoots beneath the water, but now the green stems thrust upward, bearing fresh flower heads. A time of change. New life is expected. The caterpillar of the drinker moth, so named because of its partiality to a drop of morning dew, is tempted to emerge from its winter lethargy by the increased warmth and longer hours of daylight. Both the drinker moth and the reed warbler share a common enemy. To the moth, a predator who can deal with its protective hairy coat. To the other, a parasite of relatively large proportions. The cuckoo. Reed warblers appear nervous at its presence. The reeds may offer dense protection for nesting birds, but the cuckoo will watch patiently for the moment to steal in and lay its own egg alongside those of the other bird. Despite the potential hazard, the reed warbler continues to collect nesting material. The deeply cupped nest is bound tightly to the reed stems by the female. She is encouraged by the male, his only offering towards construction. But later, he will assist with the incubation of the eggs. She collects dry grasses and strips of dead reed, a task often involving lengthy journeys away from the reed bed. A shortcut is to steal from the nest of a neighboring bird, or perhaps from one of the makeshift nests that these birds have a habit of building, some say to confuse the cuckoo. The occupied nests are tightly woven and may even be reinforced with cobwebs. Four blotched eggs, and one of them could be a cuckoo's. For nearly 2 weeks, the male and the female reed warbler will share the incubation. Male bitterns boom from very early spring to July, the months that the females shoulder all the responsibilities of nest building, incubating, and rearing the young. Perhaps the resonant notes warn would-be intruders, "Keep out, this is my patch. Somewhere in here there's a female doing all the work." To satisfy the young bittern's hunger, the female goes off in search of small fish, an appetizing introduction to the variety of food available in the reed bed. Later, the young will progress to eels, frogs, and toads, and possibly the young of moorhens or coot. Bitterns are secretive, untrusting birds, and it's difficult to work out their precise requirements for success. Some will fly as much as a mile from a reed bed to feed, whilst others may remain in the reeds and not establish breeding territories. At the turn of the century, the bittern was extinct as a breeding bird in Britain, but after natural recolonization from the continent, numbers climbed to almost 100 pairs, but more recently have declined to around 50. There seems to be no straightforward explanation for this, although natural succession to drier conditions may be a cause. Young bitterns come in all sizes, and therefore all strengths, because the female began incubating when she laid her first egg. There could easily be a week's difference between them, and such a discrepancy is revealed at moments like this. The first youngster to clamp itself like a vice onto the female's beak does so to stimulate her to regurgitate food from the crop. It may take a little time for her to be convinced that this is really what she wants to do. At least one of her young is satisfied, but there are other hungry mouths to be attended to. One factor in the breeding success of bitterns, and it's one that may prove to be highly critical, is the cleanliness of the low-lying water in the reed beds around them. Bitterns will breed only in areas where their food is plentiful, and if the reed beds cannot provide this vital need, then breeding numbers will continue to decline. The Royal Society for the Protection of Birds currently owns and manages reed beds supporting half the breeding bitterns in the British Isles. If levels of pollution are kept tolerably low and more clogged ditches are opened as fresh feeding grounds, it may still be possible for bitterns to survive in reasonable numbers. But due to the drainage of suitable habitat, their chances of reaching the high levels of a few hundred years ago are very slim. Early June, and the yellow iris adds a welcome splash of color to the encroaching sea of green. Here at the dry edges where the reed is tainted by invading scrub plants, the female reed bunting approaches her young. The nest is tucked away close to the ground, where convolvulus is gaining a foothold. By mid-June, the yellow traces of last year's reeds have almost sunk beneath a wealth of new shoots. A European swallowtail butterfly, rare inhabitant of East Anglia, feeds on the nectar of marsh valerian. At the edge of its European range, this butterfly survives because of the milkweed, on which its caterpillars are totally dependent for food. Where the damp-loving willow bursts into flower, Chetty's warblers have established themselves in the last 10 years or so. From its Mediterranean stronghold, the spread of this bird northwards at the turn of the century is one of the most remarkable ornithological events. Rival males vie for territorial rights, the calls of one answered by the vigorous tail flicking of another. Chetty's warblers first appeared in southern England in the late 1960s. They were breeding soon after, and are now established as year-long residents over much of the wet scrub and reedlands of the south. They've proved to be vigorous colonizers. By the end of June, the new reed is in full growth. It rises from the water like an impenetrable wall, slender columns giving shelter and concealment. The bearded tit spends much of its life in this dense forest, taking advantage of the abundant summer crop of insects and spiders. Possibly for the second time this season, it has young to feed, tucked well out of sight in their reed fabric nest. In late June and early July, a ready food supply appears. The caterpillar of the twin-spotted wainscot moth. The larvae have grown safely inside the reeds, eating the central pith until ready to pupate. Then, having burrowed out near the top of the stem, they crawl downwards and hide in the litter below. Those that make the journey this far will emerge as adults during August. Many are not so fortunate. They form an important addition to the diet of young bearded tits. By mid-July, blue carpets of marsh forget-me-not appear at the edge of the maturing reeds. And further in, 3 of the eggs in the reed warbler's nest were destined for an untimely end in the waters below, evicted by an earlier hatching stranger. The female cuckoo has made her mark, and now the adult reed warblers must work round the clock to satisfy the endless demands of their foster child. Their parental response to a begging mouth is too strong for them to abandon a monster, which to us is obviously not of their creation. But all is not lost for the reed warblers. They are particularly long-lived, and over the years, they will continue to feed any occupants of their nests. When they avoid the eagle eyes of the female cuckoo, it will be their own young who embark on the late summer migration from the depths of the reed bed. By the time the cuckoo is able to fly, its real parents will have long departed for Africa. Somehow, almost miraculously, it will follow. Instinct guides it south to the equator. Late August finds the young bearded tits moving through the reeds. Theirs is a reed bed existence through summer and winter, but an enforced change of diet lies ahead of them. The easily digested insects and spiders will not last much longer. At this time, the reeds begin to undergo internal changes. The sugar content moves back down to the rhizomes, and this, in turn, attracts vast numbers of the plum reed aphid. Their fine, piercing mouthparts penetrate the reed and siphon off the sweet sap. The aphids arrive in such large quantities that sedge warblers rely on them totally as a fat-building source, sustaining them on their unbroken migration to Africa. Purple heads are once again flush with minute seeds which will float away on the wind in their thousands. Most will perish, but just a few may settle, embryo-like, and take root. Tiny filaments of life striving to give birth to a new reed bed. But this has little to do with the future of the parent bed. It survives by virtue of its fast-spreading root system, already storing food to face the coming winter. The transition is abrupt. Green has once more become yellow, and now in places white, as the first snowflakes settle on the feathery traps held aloft. Summer visitors have gone, and only those birds with some inbuilt resistance to a temperate zone winter can survive here now. The newspaper of events is easily read in the snow. A bittern has passed by in search of open water in which to feed. If it is not available, it may die of starvation. Fortunately, this is a fate held in store during only the severest of winters. The birds that stay behind do so because they're adapted to survive the average conditions, those concerning temperature and food availability, that a reed bed existence imposes on them during the winter months. At its cruelest, starkest time, the beauty of a reed bed somehow seems to be heightened. Ice-free waters in the very heart of the reed bed attract wildfowl in large numbers. And despite the economy of life in winter, teal are undergoing the preliminaries of courtship. Shovelers, attracted by the teal, begin their descent, while creeping ice forces the hungry water rail out of its customary cover. In the heart of the reed bed, the bearded tit families have flocked together. With their insect food completely gone, or at least too well hidden for them to find, they harvest their share of the plentiful seeds that each reed head produces. The seeds are very small, and the birds must spend most of the limited hours of daylight hard at work. But man also has an interest in reeds. The traditional art of thatching requires certain areas of reed bed to be managed for this purpose alone. Commercial reed beds are cut and cleared every year or two to keep the growth straight and strong. Hardly any reed cutting takes place before early January, when the frost has killed the leaves and they've fallen to the ground, leaving the raw material of thatching standing in thick, accessible groves. These areas, solid underfoot and providing a high-quality plant free from litter at its base, are the reed cutter's ideal. By simple irrigation, the reed bed is kept damp enough to sustain its yearly growth, and the cutting removes the danger of scrub encroachment. But such areas are not ideal for the birds who nest and feed low down, where there is an accumulated litter from past years. There need not, however, be too much of a conflict between conservationist and cutter. Much of Britain's reed is confined to protected reserves, and it's managed in such a way as to keep it both ideal and more permanent for birds. The maintenance of our existing reed beds as permanent places for birds is a difficult task. The very nature of a reed bed is one of continuous change, the leading edge ploughing its way through open water, the trailing edge drying out and being taken over by advancing scrub. Halting such a powerful process in its tracks will be complicated and expensive. And yet, if we are to maintain valuable communities of wildlife, it must be attempted. Only then can we hope to ensure the survival of such rarities as the marsh harrier, a bird of delicate and graceful charm, whose continued existence depends almost entirely upon the future of our secret reeds.
For centuries, British birds of prey have been persecuted, blamed for harassing game birds and domestic poultry. One species was even named after its reputation for chasing chickens, the hen harrier, much maligned and misunderstood. It is one of our least known but most vulnerable birds of prey. The plumage of the owl-like female contrasts sharply with the tailored grey neatness of her mate. The difference between the male blue hawk and female ringtail was destined to confuse naturalists for hundreds of years. Few could believe that the two birds were of the same species. Traditional farming meant that grain was spilt and wasted. The small seed-eating birds in which hen harriers thrived were abundant. Last century, pairs of harriers were a common sight, even in southern counties. But guns were often raised at this unpopular predator. Both persecution and changes in the countryside caused the harriers to disappear. They became a rare sight south of Scotland. By the First World War, the species only nested in the most remote parts of Britain. As the nation's guns were trained in different sites, the fortunes of the hen harrier improved. Two world wars had increased the nation's demand for timber. A post-war forestry boom gave the harriers a perfect opportunity to expand their nesting grounds. Often persecuted on open moorland, conifer plantations allowed them to breed undisturbed. Although still uncommon, harriers now nest at a number of mainland sites. The timber boom is over, but the uplands are still covered with a patchwork of conifer plantations. Typically a bird of exposed moorlands, hen harriers still thrive in these forests. Young conifer plantations are ideal harrier hunting grounds. Voles and meadow pipits are all plentiful. Long-legged and clumsy on the ground, Once in the air, the hen harrier is a master of aerial maneuvers. In this bird, swiftness and agility are perfectly combined. Prey may be caught unawares with the surprising speed of an attack. In Britain today, it is the forest nesting harriers that raise their young most successfully. Commercial forests take nearly 40 years to mature. Many post-war plantations are now ready for processing. As old trees are felled and stripped, the forests are continually replaced. But no one can be sure how suitable the new plantations will be for hen harriers or their prey. Still at risk when nesting on open moors, forest sites remain vital for breeding harriers. The demand for timber gave the hen harrier a chance to breed again on mainland Britain. This opportunity, so recently gained, might easily be lost. The hen harrier is found throughout the Northern Hemisphere. In autumn, British harriers disperse from their nesting grounds. Many head west for Ireland or to northern France. Colder winters drive Scandinavian hen harriers south to join those that remain here during the winter months. The birds are regularly seen hunting through the fields of northern Britain and East Anglia. Like all raptors, hen harriers rarely receive a warm welcome from other birds, but a female is not easily deterred from her early morning mission. Distance presents no problem to a strong winged harrier. Birds will fly 20 miles from the roost, patrolling hedgerows, woods and fields. Wintering finches seek safety in numbers as they flock together. They may feed in the same field for weeks, picking among the weeds and beet tops. Harriers make regular hunting trips, searching the same fields in the hope of a lucky strike. The slightly larger females are capable of killing young game birds and rabbits, but a fully grown pheasant would really be quite safe. A vixen's bark in neighbouring woodland overrides the peace of a winter's afternoon. These waterlogged reeds conceal trampled beds of vegetation where harriers roost in safety, away from foxes and other predators. Solitary hunters, hen harriers often roost together. In the hour before sunset, individual birds stream back towards the reeds. As if by sleight of hand, birds already settled are displaced by late arrivals. During the time of their decline, such gatherings were rarely seen. Today, roost numbers fluctuate throughout the winter. Sometimes 30 birds have been seen at one location. When stronger winds are gusting, the harriers demonstrate their sheer exuberance with flight, stalling and diving in a timeless pageant before finally dropping down to roost. The Hebridean island of Islay, close to the west coast of Scotland. Islay is best known for its whisky and flocks of wintering wildfowl. Barnacle geese mow their way across a field on the RSPB reserve, ignoring the daffodils that were once cultivated here. Year-round, the reserve provides refuge for hen harriers as well as water birds. Rabbits are the main source of food for the female harriers that overwinter on Isla. Successful hunting now will ensure the female reaches peak breeding condition by spring. Patrolling the field edge where the rushes end is a favourite hunting strategy. Success will only come if she can snatch at a young or unwary rabbit. By early March, spring has begun to change the character of the island. The first geese depart for Iceland, a staging post on their long onward flight to Greenland. Roe deer seek for new growth amongst the winter-dried heather as the first pairs of breeding harriers return, circling high over the moor to make a preliminary inspection. A hint of unsettled weather and the birds disappear. A bad spring can disrupt their aerobatic courtship routines. On the first fine day, the female drifts in the air, displaying her bright ringed tail. It is time to re-establish old partnerships. Male hen harriers often support more than one female. He may already have another partner, but by playfully mirroring her in flight, he shows that he is still interested. Eventually the birds part, and she settles to watch the early stages of his undulating display flight. She waits as his performance moves on to another stage. Drifting low over the heather, fluttering his delicate wings, he marks a potential nesting site. But this is only a warm-up routine. The real sky dance spectacular is yet to begin. There is no regular pattern to this frenzied dance, no adequate explanation for the elaborate turns as the male corkscrews through the air. As he repeats his reckless performance across the moor. With one female already settled, his dance may attract more birds to join his harem. Females too will sky dance when competition for males is fierce, although their courtly performance is often more sedate. Before the nest is finally built, the female waits to follow her partner's lead. Giving chase, she begs him to release his nuptial offering. The meadow pipit's own nest preparations seem uncomfortably close to the displaying harriers. The male lands with his offering, but he has no intention of feeding, certain to have lured the female to his chosen nest site. By the time the harrier is on eggs, most lapwing chicks will have hatched. There will be plenty of young waders to keep the harriers well supplied. Close to the nest site, the female still solicits further attention from a partner. The pair will mate on many occasions before she begins her month-long incubation of the eggs. Moorland blooms are more subtle than spring flowers elsewhere, but the season is still vibrant. Fortunately plentiful, meadow pipits are the mainstay of the harrier's diet. As Britain's most numerous upland bird, the busy parents can raise 2 successful broods each summer. Making only short excursions, the female collects nearby heather stems to add to her nest of trampled vegetation. More familiar as a marshland species, the curlew is also an upland breeding bird. Young curlew chicks are important to the harrier's varied diet. By late May, the first egg has been laid. Others will follow at 2 to 4 day intervals. Fussing around the nest, the female prepares herself for the month-long sit-in as she continues to line the nest with softer grasses. Once laying has begun, the male's hunting luck must increase. To breed successfully, he must supply all his female's demands. At least 4 times a day, the male must return with food. He glides towards the nest, enticing the female to meet him in the air. The food pass is an extravagant alternative to delivering the prey directly to the ground. For him to land would only reveal the nest's exact location. One of the 5 eggs has already begun to hatch, but it will be over a week before all the chicks have emerged. The male's alarm calls are not enough to persuade her off the nest. A buzzard, high overhead, presents no real threat to the hen harriers. Nonetheless, its presence must be deterred. Confident that the male will deal with the intruder, she remains over the eggs. Although smaller than the buzzard, the male pursues his attack with vigor until the larger bird is driven away. The first egg may hatch 10 days before the last chick chips its way into the world. With the tiny white egg tooth still visible on the top of the bill, the chicks are unable to feed themselves. Until their talons are strong enough to grasp the meat, the female plucks the prey and feeds them tiny morsels. The male hunts well away from the nest, quartering the grassland around a deserted cottage. His quarry identified, he stalls and dives into the vegetation to snatch the prey. At a distance, the outcome of the hunt may not be revealed until he rises, a vole or bird clasped in outstretched talons. The low-level food pass is swift and urgent. His bright plumage might attract unwelcome attention while the chicks are young. Coasting low to investigate, the young golden eagle has been attracted by the harrier's activity. The female is vigorous in her defense of the nest. No predator is too big for her to take on. She circles to make sure that danger is over before returning to the nest. Only a week old, the chicks have gained weight, and the cere around the bill is turning to a greenish yellow. The fourth egg failed to hatch. The obvious difference between the chick's size shows how rapidly the young develop. The youngest lunges as aggressively as the other three, but inevitably its share of the food will be less. At this stage, one of the biggest threats to the chicks is bad weather. Their rabbit grey down is not effective at protecting them from the rain and chill. Although all 4 chicks can barely snuggle beneath her wings, the female does her best to shelter them. It's unlikely that the male will be hunting during the rain. All the hen can do is to sit tight. Any undigested bone and feathers must be removed from the nest. Waste would only attract predators. Successful breeders on islands and reserves, the high moors of the north are the natural nesting grounds of the hen harrier. At 2 weeks, feathers begin to replace the down. In daylight hours, both parents now must hunt to supply the chick's insatiable appetite. But the haste of the male's food drop leaves them exposed and vulnerable to predators. As they lose their down, the young harriers develop the female's brown camouflaged plumage. Any males in the brood will not turn grey until their first summer moult. Feet can be helpful when competing for food. As long as they're your own. As fledging approaches, the young spend more time out of the nest. The dense vegetation provides shade and protection, although they are quick to respond to the adult's return with food. With down still covering the youngest chick's head, the oldest takes its first flight away from the nest. For at least 5,000 years, hen harriers have shared their moorland existence with red grouse. Grouse thrive by eating moorland shrubs and heather, but they are prone to parasites and disease. A bad grouse year may have serious economic repercussions in the uplands. Soon the parents' relentless spring task of provisioning the young will be over, as the fledglings leave the vicinity of the nest. In the first year, many harriers die, both from natural and, regrettably, human causes. But those that know the hen harrier in flight can only consider it with awe. Its complete mastery of the air continues to amaze as the birds perform their annual sky dance over northern moors.